Welcome to Crimson Tales, where shadows whisper secrets and every story bleeds mystery. Dare to step inside? This story is written and narrated by Crimson Tales. Now let's start the video.
Godric's Hollow had never been particularly lively. On most nights, the village felt like it existed only in memory. Chimneys puffing faint smoke, narrow streets slick with moonlight, and cottages that huddled together as if for protection. That night, however, the silence was different. Heavy, anticipatory. It pressed into the bones and the air itself, as if the world knew what was coming and chose to hold its breath. James Potter, lying awake in the sitting room with a barely functioning wand in his hand, felt at first a cold pulse, subtle but undeniable, rattled through the walls. Before he could even rise, the front door exploded inward. Wood and stone exploded in splinters, sending shards and dust across the floor. The raw force of the magic was precise, deliberate, and entirely merciless. James's instinct screamed at him to shield the child, but he already knew it was too late. His wand was raised in a motion that was meaningless before the green light tore through the Tharthal. Voldemort did not waste a moment. The air shimmered with the pressure of his presence. The killing curse struck James without hesitation, a blade of light and intent that James could not counter. His body crumpled to the floor in a soundless fall. There was no heroism in his death, only the grim finality of inevitability. Upstairs, Lily Potter screamed, not in terror, but in fury. She did not flee. She did not beg. She planted herself between the crib and the approaching death, her wand trembling as magic surged through her veins. But it was not just spell work. It was instinct, sharpened by love and desperation into a weapon. Sacrifice formed around her like a living shield, bright and deadly. She channeled every ounce of herself, every memory, every heartbeat into it. The air thickened, charged with power that dwarfed ordinary comprehension. Voldemort ascended the stairs with that characteristic calm that unnerved even the bravest of Death Eaters. His green eyes flicked from the mother to the crib, and for a moment there was the faintest hesitation. "Step aside," he said, the words detached, almost bored. Lily did not move. The curse left his wand, and the world fractured. Golden light exploded outward from somewhere beyond, tearing through wards, through walls, through the very air. Magic older than Hogwarts itself seemed to awaken, pressing in from all sides. The killing curse collided with it at the precise moment. Dumbledore arrived, a storm made human, a force no ordinary magic could contain. Three powers met in the cramped space of the Potter cottage: death, sacrifice, and containment. The curse did not rebound. It shattered, its energy fractured, splintered, stripped of cohesion. Fragments scraped across Harry rather than severing him. Heat, pain, and the strangest pressure rippled through the crib, as if the world itself had reached out and failed to claim the child. Harry Potter did not cry. His eyes opened, wide and unblinking, absorbing everything, focused, cold, small, but infinitely present. Voldemort felt it immediately. Not defiance, not instinctive shield, something far older, deeper, and impossible. Resistance, the kind that existed before magic, before curses, before love or fear. He leaned closer, curiosity flickering as though the infant were a puzzle, a living question. Before Dumbledore could intervene, before Lily's final spell could fully form, Voldemort's hand shot forward, two fingers pressed briefly to Harry's forehead. Dumbledore shouted, the sound slicing through chaos, but it was already too late. The mark embedded itself. Not a curse, not a Horcrux, not possession, a sigil hidden beneath scar tissue, beneath the forming wards, beneath notice. Its purpose, to allow access where none should exist. The scar flared red as it anchored, then subsided, leaving only a thin lightning streak and a pulse faint enough to pass unnoticed. Voldemort withdrew immediately, fading into shadows as Dumbledore's counterspell tore through the space he had occupied a heartbeat before. There was no battle. There was no victory to claim here. The cottage groaned under the strain of magics it had never been built to contain. Walls cracked, beams splintered, and fire licked at the remnants of the roof. Lily lay still, her sacrifice incomplete, her eyes closed. Dumbledore knelt in the debris, heart hammering. Dust swirled around him. The air still smelled of ozone and burning wood. He carefully lifted the child into his arms. Harry Potter's eyes, impossibly calm, stared up at him. No tears, no fear, no confusion. Just awareness far beyond his years. The lightning scar gleamed faintly under the moonlight, thin and perfect, like a thread tying the past to a future that no one yet understood. "It's over," Dumbledore whispered, to himself, as much as to the child. "You're safe now." But somewhere far beyond the wards, beyond the protective enchantments and the fire-scorched ruins of the Potter home, Voldemort watched. He touched his fingers together in faint acknowledgement. The mark pulsed once. The old man would hide the child, ward him, protect him, cage him in love and magic and rules. And Voldemort smiled, not in triumph, not in malice, in satisfaction. Protection, after all, was only another kind of door. Voldemort did not return to Godric's Hollow. He did not linger among the rubble or gloat over the dead. The world, he knew, had shifted enough for observation to be unnecessary. Alone in a darkened place far from any human eye, he crouched over a small, dark pool of water, looking at it as though it were the only mirror that could reflect what truly mattered. His fingers hovered above the surface, tracing the contours of a mark only he knew existed. The sigil beneath Harry's scar was subtle, imperceptible to ordinary detection, impervious to even Dumbledore's strongest organs. It did not command, did not bend, did not demand. It only allowed permission without coercion, access without notice. "The child is interesting," Voldemort murmured. He traced the tip of a finger through the reflective surface, watching as ripples distorted the faint image of the scarred forehead. So small, so fragile, and yet his lips curled, so resistant. "I have never met such resistance, not even in myself." He thought of Dumbledore, the old man who had intervened and blocked what should have been the effortless claiming of a soul. Dumbledore had arrived too late to save James or Lily, and yet perfectly in time to protect the boy. Every precaution Dumbledore would place on the child would be recognized by the mark as valid. Every enchantment, every blood ward, every charm meant to bind Harry would become a doorway for him instead. Voldemort could not have predicted the exact mechanics. Few could, but he had accounted for probability and instinct. The sigil was ancient, older than wands, older than Hogwarts itself, older than even the memory of his first bodiless wanderings. A simple truth expressed as magic. What is protected may be accessed through the self. He had not wanted to enslave the child. That was unnecessary. Harry's value lay in knowledge, in potential, in the way a living being could be a mirror of power and intellect. Control would destroy that. Influence would not. Voldemort smiled and straightened. A long plan was already unfolding. Dumbledore would hide the child, place him in wards, shelter him with love and rules. That was perfect. The boy would grow, think himself safe, unobserved, ordinary. He would learn to suppress magic, to seem small, to obey appearances, and yet, whenever Voldemort chose, the child could be reached, access without suspicion, access without intervention. Meanwhile, Dumbledore was meticulously arranging the protections. Privet Drive would be fortified with every enchantment, every blood ward imaginable. To Nia Dursley's sacrifices, unconscious and unintentional, would bind Harry to the place, make him safe through love, ignorance, and conformity. The old man, in his wisdom, believed that proximity to mundane humans and the enforced smallness of life would protect the boy. Dumbledore never suspected. How could he? Wards were intact. The child appeared weak, frightened, alone. Harry's cries were small. His hands were pale and fragile, and yet hidden beneath the scar, hidden beneath the ward magic itself, the mark waited, dormant, silent, perfect. For a moment, Voldemort allowed himself a rare thought, curiosity. What would the boy become if left unobserved for years? Would Dumbledore's love shape him? Would the mundane cruelty of the Dursleys teach him patience or rage? Would the natural cruelty of the world awaken something darker or sharper? The possibilities were infinite, and for once he allowed himself to savor them. "I will teach him," he whispered. His voice was soft, almost intimate. "He will learn what I have learned. He will know magic beyond what these fools can teach him. He will not be Beale. Not entirely. He will see." And then the thought struck him fully. The child might even surpass him. The idea thrilled him in a way he had never admitted even to himself. Not power, not dominance, only potential. The mark ensured that, when the time came, he could reach the boy, guide him, teach him, but never compel him. That line of separation was delicate, precise, perfect. He did not consider himself a guardian, nor a master. He considered himself a teacher. That was enough. Far away, Dumbledore finished his own preparations. The wards on Privet Drive shimmered with protective light. They were designed to repel intrusion, to cloak, to confuse, to protect. Every enchantment, every thread of magical safety was perfect in the old man's estimation. He looked at the boy sleeping quietly in the center of the house and allowed himself a small, rare smile. "Safe," he whispered again. Though deep in his heart, he knew that this was only as true as any spell could make it. And somewhere unseen, the mark pulsed faintly, a rhythm almost imperceptible, like the beat of a hidden heart. It acknowledged the protections, without resisting, biding its time, lying dormant beneath Dumbledore's axe. It would wait, it would watch, it would learn. Voldemort turned and left his hiding place. The night was still. Godric's Hollow, scarred and silent, seemed to exhale after the storm of power. The world had changed, and only a few, very few, would know it. The child's future was no longer merely protected, it was reachable, and Voldemort smiled in satisfaction. Privet Drive had never felt stranger to the Dursleys. Normally, it was a street of quiet compliance, where their neighbors' eyes swept past. Their lawns were mowed on schedule, and the world behaved exactly as it should. But the night Harry Potter arrived changed that. Even in their ignorance, Vernon and Petunia sensed it. The house had shifted. The air seemed heavier, charged with something that pressed against the ordinary, and the child in their care carried a weight that no infant should have borne. Dumbledore had spent hours layering protections around the house, blood wards anchored to Petunia's veins, tied to her own self-preservation instinct, spatial charms that twisted corridors, charms that alerted him to intrusion or malicious intent. The magic was subtle yet absolute. From the outside, Privet Drive looked normal, safe, mundane. From the inside, it was a fortress, a cage of comfort, ignorance, and enforced obedience, designed to shelter the child from every known danger. And yet, none of it mattered to the mark. Harry slept quietly in the small bedroom that had been carefully prepared for him, his scar faintly warm beneath the soft fabric of the blanket. The wards hummed in his presence, attuned to protection, yet the sigil Voldemort had placed there recognized them as a path, a way through without resistance. It pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat too subtle to notice, and Harry stirred in his sleep, rolling onto his back with an awareness far beyond his age. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. Shadows clung to the corners of the house, but they did not belong to the Dursleys. They belonged to the presence that had never left. Voldemort moved silently through the walls, unseen and undetectable, feeling the pulse of the mark beneath the child's scar. He did not disturb the wards, did not violate the enchantments. He was not intruding. He was merely present. The protections, perfect in Dumbledore's estimation, acknowledged him without knowing. The Dursleys had changed before they even realized it. Vernon, normally a man who barked and stomped, felt an unreasoning hesitation when he moved near the crib. Petunia, usually fussy and frantic, found herself pausing, as though some invisible authority pressed against her, redirecting instinctive cruelty into compliance. They could not name it, could not explain it, but the presence of the child and the unperceived hand of the Dark Lord had already begun to shape them. Harry's eyes opened. He was only a toddler, small and still, but the awareness in them was immediate and sharp. He looked at the ceiling, then at the walls, then toward the hallway. The mark pulsed faintly, an acknowledgement, a whisper in the back of his mind that something existed beyond these walls, beyond Dumbledore, beyond the Dursleys, beyond what anyone could see. The child felt it without fear. He recognized it instinctively. This was not a curse, not a command, only presence, only knowledge. Voldemort spoke once, in a tone so low that only the mark could carry it. Watch, learn, wait. No sound left the room. No spell flared. The Dursleys did not hear, and Dumbledore's wards did not register it. Only Harry knew, and in knowing, he understood the rules. This presence where teach could guide, but it could not force. And already he was learning the most important lesson of all, that power unobserved was dangerous, and that knowledge without limits was freedom. The house, meanwhile, seemed to hum in compliance, spells intertwined with mundane furniture, walls, floors. The nursery was untouched physically, but metaphysically, it had changed. Even the air seemed charged, and the warmth of a normal home became brittle under the weight of layered magic. The Dursleys moved with an instinctive caution they could not comprehend. Vernon's hand froze mid-motion when he reached for a toy, as though the toy itself had recognized authority. Petunia straightened reflexively, as though the room had reminded her of something she could not recall. And the child, small and silent, took it all in. Harry Potter, the boy who would not cry, did not wail, did not even fuss. He observed, he remembered. He understood, already, even in infancy, the rules of power, of presence, of invisibility were clear to him. Voldemort watched from the shadows, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, with calculation. Every movement, every heartbeat, every flicker of awareness in the child was data. He did not manipulate, did not control, did not interfere beyond the mark. Yet the influence of his presence shaped everything around Harry. The child would learn faster because of this. The Dursleys would obey silently, unconsciously. A lesson in subtlety Harry would absorb without knowing he had been taught. Dumbledore visited once more that night. He inspected the wards, checked the blood protections, whispered charms into the night air. He saw only a frail, sleeping child. He saw safety. He believed in it with the full measure of his vast wisdom, but he did not notice the pulse beneath the scar. He did not see the shadow walking unseen through the protections. He did not realize that even here, the strongest cage in the world had a door only the head could open, and that someone far away was already teaching him how. Harry turned his head slightly in the crib. His tiny hand flexed, as if feeling something invisible. He was smiling, faintly, almost imperceptibly, not because he was happy, not because he was safe, but because he understood already what most would never comprehend, that power could exist quietly, patiently, unseen, and that knowledge was the first weapon a child would need. Voldemort lingered just beyond perception, not to threaten, not to command, only to watch, and to teach, and to wait. And as the child slept, the mark pulsed faintly, perfectly, silently, an invisible thread connecting them across time, distance, and protection. Private Drive had changed forever, and the boy at its center had already begun to learn.
Author's note: this chapter reimagines the fateful night at Godric's Hollow, blending sacrifice, magic, and subtle strategy into a single tense moment. It explores power hidden in vulnerability, showing that even an infant can hold awareness beyond comprehension. Here begins the story of Harry Potter, not as a victim, but as a child who absorbs, learns, and survives.
Private Drive was designed to be ordinary. Every brick in every house, every garden trimmed with monotony, every pavement swept smooth, existed for one purpose, to create normalcy. But the arrival of Harry Potter changed everything. The house that had once felt mundane now vibrated with quiet tension, a constant pressure that the Dursleys could not explain. They did not yet understand why they were afraid, only that fear had arrived without warning, subtle and pervasive. Voldemort did not enter the house as a storm. He did not raise a wand, did not mutter incantations, audible to mortal ears. Instead, he imposed his will through the mark he had left on the child, a presence that moved through the wards and the blood enchantments, without breaking them. The Dursleys were subtly corrected, like pieces on a board nudged into alignment without noticing the hand that moved them. Vernon's hand would pause mid-grab. Petunia would hesitate in thought. Dudley's whines fell into silence before they began. It was not magic they could perceive. It was instinct bending under invisible authority. Harry watched it all with eyes that were far too old for his face. He did not understand words, but he understood cause and effect. A look at the corner of the room, a tilt of his head, and the behavior of the adults shifted subtly, automatically. He had learned something important within the first months of life. Presence alone was power. No wand, no spell, no demonstration of force was needed. Only intent and awareness. One evening, when the sun had set in muted gold behind the carefully trimmed hedges, Vernon Dursley snapped his fingers sharply at Harry across the living room, trying to force the boy into behavior he considered acceptable. Harry did not move, but his eyes followed him. Vernon froze mid-motion, his hands suspended in the air, and the color drained from his face. A faint pressure, imperceptible but undeniable, pushed against him as though the house itself had decided the child's wishes mattered more than his own authority. His arm fell limply to his side. He did not understand why he could not act, only that he could not, and the realization brought him a fear he had never known. Petunia, who had spent months fussing over details and scanning the neighborhood for invisible dangers, stopped folding laundry mid-fold, her body rigid and her heart hammering in a rhythm that felt foreign to her. She could not explain it. There was no spell, no wand, no visible force acting on her, yet her limbs and thoughts betrayed her. Something in the house or in the child was greater than her understanding, and she obeyed without comprehension. The correction was subtle, but absolute. Harry's small hand flexed against the soft blanket in his crib as he observed them. He was not yet aware of the word power, nor of what it meant to command through perception alone, yet instinctively he experimented. A shift of attention toward Dudley's feet made the boy stop moving mid-step. A glance at a broom propped in the corner made it lean slightly, though no wind had touched it. He was discovering the limits of influence, the way presence alone could shape outcomes, and he was learning to hide it, to practice invisibility of action. Even Dumbledore's wards could not perceive his deliberate restraint. Voldemort watched from the shadows of the unseen, feeding lessons silently through the mark, without interference, without command. Harry learned to feel the presence of intent, to recognize the invisible hand, and to differentiate between authority that demanded compliance and authority that guided subtly. Each interaction with the Dursleys became a silent classroom, each small success a victory of understanding over instinct. Occasionally, Harry would murmur a single word, soft and unconsciously, and the Dursleys would comply. It was not magic, they recognized, but the impossibility of defiance in the presence of the child. They began to bend to him, to shape their behavior around invisible rules they could not name. The house itself seemed to hum in agreement, walls, floors, and ceilings, recognizing the latent power that the wards alone could not contain. The child's training was invisible, silent, and absolute. Each observation, each slight movement, each unspoken intent built a foundation of understanding that no ordinary human could imagine. Harry understood cause and effect, fear and compliance, influence and submission, all before he could speak properly. And the Dursleys continued their lives under this subtle influence, unaware of the unseen hand that guided them, unaware that they were training the boy for a power far beyond their comprehension. They thought themselves masters of the household. They were not. Voldemort lingered in the corner of Harry's mind, a silent teacher. Not a master, not a tyrant, only a presence, imparting knowledge, testing responses, shaping awareness. Harry's first lessons were subtle, invisible. How to bend intention, how to sense authority, how to wield presence as weapon and shield. And as the nights passed, the boy's mind sharpened faster than any child's should, his understanding of power forming like the slow, inevitable death of ice in a dark river. By the time Dumbledore visited again, the boy was already learning lessons no ordinary human could perceive. The old man checked wards and blood protections, murmured charms, and ensured the child's safety in every known way. He saw only a quiet, sleeping infant. He believed in the protections he had placed. He believed the child was safe. But Harry Potter, eyes open beneath the scar, was already awake. He had learned the first rule of power. Compliance need not be forced. Authority need not be announced. Presence alone could reshape reality, and the mark beneath his scar pulsed faintly, waiting, teaching, guiding. Privet Drive had changed, and at its center, the boy had begun to understand just how much the world would bend before him, even when no one knew he existed. The house on Privet Drive had grown quiet in ways no one would notice. The walls hummed faintly with residual wards. The floorboards creaked with deliberate precision, and the air itself seemed heavier, almost charged, as if the very space was aware of what it contained. Harry Potter, still a toddler by human standards, lay awake in his crib, small hands clenched lightly against the blanket, eyes wide and unblinking. He did not cry. He did not fuss. He did not demand attention, though he was fully aware of every movement, every breath, every heartbeat within the house. The mark under his scar pulsed faintly, subtle but insistent. It carried presence, a whisper of guidance that Harry could sense without knowing why. He had no words yet for what it was, no understanding of names like power or magic, and yet instinctively he knew that the world around him bent subtly when he willed it. A glance toward a falling toy, and it tilted upright, a shift of attention toward a spinning fan of dust on the floor, and it settled. Nothing overt, nothing alarming, only tiny adjustments, imperceptible to the Dursleys and even to Dumbledore's magical gaze. Voldemort's presence, though distant, was alive in the sigil. It did not command. It did not manipulate. It only taught. Lessons were delivered in ways Harry understood before he could articulate them. Intent, observation, cause and effect, the weight of unseen force. The Dark Lord had not sought to control the child. He had sought to make him aware, to make him precise, to make him dangerous in understanding before he was dangerous in action. One evening, when the air had settled into a still, oppressive heat, Harry shifted his gaze across the nursery. A small toy soldier, perched on a shelf, wobbled slightly and fell. No sound escaped, but Harry noted the movement. He raised his tiny hand subtly, almost lazily, and the soldier stood again. It teetered at first, then straightened, as if guided by invisible fingers. He smiled faintly, not from amusement, but from comprehension. This was a language he understood. Presence, influence, effect. Voldemort's voice entered his mind, not words, but sensations. Do you see it? Control is unnecessary. Let influence flow through perception. Watch, learn, wait. Harry's attention sharpened. He realized that even when Dumbledore's wards hummed around him, even when the Dursleys moved under instinctual correction, he could feel what was possible. It was like hearing sound without opening his ears, seeing motion without opening his eyes. The child's mind, impossibly small, began mapping the world in terms of cause, reaction, and subtle force. The Dursleys continued their routines. Vernon grumbled, Petunia scolded, Dudley whined. All of it passed through Harry's awareness like water over stones, and each action had its consequences. A sharp look from Harry caused Dudley to freeze mid-step. The boy's whine abruptly cut off, though no one could explain why. Petunia paused in the kitchen, her hand halfway to a kettle, and stared at the floor as if it had suddenly spoken. Even Vernon, who believed himself the master of the household, hesitated before snapping at the child. He did not know why. He would not understand. The influence was subtle, but absolute. Harry experimented cautiously, small shifts of attention that bent the ordinary world around him. He felt the rhythm of the house, the subtle heartbeat of the wards, the tension beneath the Dursleys' limbs, and he understood, instinctively, that his power was not only a reflection of himself, but of the knowledge imparted by the sigil, the silent teacher embedded in his scar. Voldemort's lessons were patient, never demanding, guiding without touch. By the next night, Harry had begun the first of what would become countless exercises. A toy carriage on the floor, teetering dangerously close to falling, remained upright as he tilted his attention toward it. A eight flickering from the candle stub on the mantel stabilized without heat or wind. He was practicing influence without intervention, control without exposure. Already, he knew that observing was more powerful than striking, that presence could bend the world quietly, invisibly. Voldemort observed from the edges of perception. He felt the child's mind expand, absorb, adapt. There was no fear, no obedience, only understanding. And that understanding, he knew, would one day become a weapon of unimaginable precision. The Dark Lord smiled faintly. Not with triumph, not with pride, only with calculation. The boy would learn, and when the boy was ready, he would know. Even Dumbledore, during his brief visits, could not sense it. He checked wards, blood protections, enchantments, and reassured himself that the child was safe, small, and unremarkable. He did not notice the faint pulse beneath the scar, the invisible teacher shaping awareness, the subtle power Harry already wielded in silence. And so he left, confident, unaware that the greatest lessons Harry would ever receive came not from protection, but from the shadow hidden in his very skin. By the time morning light crept over Privet Drive, Harry lay back against his blanket, hands folded neatly, eyes open, and calm beyond comprehension. He had learned the first rule of presence. Power need not be demonstrated. Authority need not be asserted. Influence, silent and invisible, was enough. And far beyond the reach of Dumbledore or the Dursleys, the mark pulsed once, faintly, as if in approval. The lessons had begun. Harry Potter had begun to understand, and the world would bend around him, quietly, invisibly, inevitably. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the drawn curtains of Privet Drive, pale and timid as though even the sun hesitated before entering the house. Harry Potter lay in his crib, small fingers flexing against the soft blanket, eyes wide and observant. He did not stir. He did not cry. His mind was already working, already sorting, measuring, calculating. The household with its mundane sounds, the ticking clock, the clatter of breakfast preparations, Dudley's occasional whining was as much a part of his classroom as the nursery itself. The mark beneath his scar pulsed faintly, a rhythm Harry felt rather than heard. It was a quiet signal, a steady guide, like the faint pulse of a heartbeat that was not his own. Voldemort's sense, though distant, flowed through it. He did not speak aloud, did not cast spells, did not manipulate. The lessons were delivered as sensation, as awareness, as an understanding of cause and effect, without explanation. Harry shifted his attention to the toy train, resting on a low shelf. It wobbled slightly, unsteady on its tiny wheels. The boy's gaze fixed on it, not consciously moving, not touching. A faint tremor passed through the toy, barely perceptible, and it righted itself. Harry's small lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He had understood something that others could not. Intent, even when unseen, could shape reality. From the corner of the room, the Dursleys moved according to their usual routines, unaware of the invisible adjustments happening around them. Vernon stomped toward the kitchen, his hand raised to grab a newspaper, and froze mid-step, as if the floor beneath him had whispered a warning. Petunia bent to pick up a dropped sock, but her arm hovered, suspended by some inexplicable pressure. Dudley's whines faded mid-cry. All of it passed through Harry's awareness. He was learning, in small increments, the subtle language of influence. Voldemort's presence pressed against him through the mark. Observe, adjust, control, without touching. Do not act where you are watched. Presence alone is sufficient. The voice was not audible. It was a sensation, a guide threading through Harry's perception. He understood it instinctively. Lessons were not forced, only suggested. Observation became practice. Awareness became weapon. Harry's attention drifted toward the window. A small bird perched on the hedge outside, flicking its wings, unaware of the child watching. He willed nothing consciously, only shifted his perception slightly toward the creature. Its movements slowed, almost imperceptibly, as though time itself had bent around his awareness. It fluttered again, then flew away, leaving Harry with the first taste of subtle, deliberate influence. He had begun to experiment, cautiously, quietly, as if testing a muscle for the first time. Later, when the Dursleys gathered around the breakfast table, the lessons continued. Vernon's chair creaked as he reached for a spoon, and Harry's glance caused it to tilt slightly, settling back into place when the child willed it. Petunia dropped a napkin mid-fold, her hands suspended in a small gesture she could not complete, and Dudley, now fully awake, reached for a bowl that he never touched. All of it occurred without spectacle, without sound, without recognition. The child learned how the world moved when observed carefully, how even minor adjustments could ripple outward, producing results far beyond the immediate action. By midday, Harry had tested the reach of his influence further. He shifted attention toward a candle stub on the mantel. It flickered uncertainly in the draftless room. He imagined it steady, unperturbed. The flame stabilized instantly. Harry's comprehension grew. Influence did not require movement, voice, or demonstration. Observation alone, intention alone, sufficed to bend the ordinary toward his will. Voldemort's guidance remained constant, steady, like the slow pulse of a distant drum. He did not interfere, did not act through Harry, did not demand obedience. This is your world to understand. Watch, learn, wait. Harry felt the weight of the lesson deep in his chest, in his mind, in the very marrow of his being. He was not afraid. He had no reason to be. The Dark Lord was not a master. He was a teacher, subtle, patient, invisible. By evening, Harry experimented with larger adjustments. He focused on a small wooden toy carriage across the nursery. Its wheels wobbled precariously. He willed it upright. It straightened instantly, teetering as if pushed by a breathless wind only he could feel. He flexed his small fingers experimentally, testing the edge of his reach, sensing the contours of cause and effect in a world too ordinary to understand it fully. The Dursleys went about their day, ignorant of the subtle shifts surrounding them. They believed themselves in control. They were not. Every glance, every thought, every unspoken intention from the boy carried weight beyond their comprehension. Privet Drive was quiet, ordinary, safe in appearance, but the invisible classroom hummed with silent lessons. As night fell, Harry lay back in his crib, eyes open beneath the lightning-shaped scar. The mark pulsed faintly, approval and guidance in equal measure. He had begun to learn the rules of unseen power. He had begun to test boundaries. He had begun to understand that observation, patience, and presence were stronger than shouting, stronger than fury, stronger than the mundane authority of adults. Voldemort observed from beyond perception. He did not interfere. He did not command. He did not take. He only watched, and in the quiet pulse of the mark, he knew that the lessons were working. The child was learning to see, to influence, to act without being seen. The boy would be prepared. The boy would be ready. And Harry Potter, small, silent, aware beyond years, smiled faintly. He had begun to understand the first and most vital truth, that true power was not force, not command, not magic cast in spectacle, but subtle, invisible, and impossible to resist. Privet Drive remained ordinary to all who looked, but the boy at its center had begun to awaken.
Author's note here. These chapters explore Harry's earliest lessons in power, showing how presence and perception can shape reality even before words or spells exist. It highlights the subtle, silent influence that defines his childhood under unseen guidance. Here begins the awakening of a mind far older and sharper than the world suspects.
The nursery at Privet Drive had become a quiet laboratory. The walls, painted pale cream and lined with shelves of toys, seemed ordinary to anyone who entered. But to Harry, the room hummed with possibility. He lay on the floor, small fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air, eyes focused intently. Each breath he took was measured, each blink deliberate. Even at this age, the child had begun to understand that observation and intent were as potent as any wand or spell. The mark beneath his scar pulsed faintly, steady and patient. Voldemort's guidance filtered through it. Not voice, not command, only sensation. Harry felt it as a pressure in the back of his mind. A subtle rhythm, sense, understand, influence, weight. The lessons were invisible, quiet, demanding nothing yet teaching everything. And the boy obeyed instinctively. Today, he had chosen a challenge. A small wooden block tower sat on the floor, its base uneven, threatening collapse. Harry's gaze shifted to the structure. He did not touch it. He did not speak. Instead, he willed it to remain, imagining the balance that should exist. The blocks wobbled, shivering slightly, then stabilized perfectly. Harry's small hand flexed in satisfaction. He had learned the first rule of hidden magic. It required precision, focus, and patience, but never spectacle. Vernon Dursley's footsteps echoed down the hall. Harry's eyes flicked toward the doorway, noting the man's shadow before he entered the room. Vernon reached toward the boy, an impatient gesture, but froze mid-step. The block tower remained upright, impervious to distraction, and Vernon's hand lowered without understanding why. Harry smiled faintly, aware of the subtle chain of influence he now wielded. The ordinary world bent, quietly, invisibly, around his awareness. Petunia entered next, carrying a laundry basket. She placed it on the floor, but the moment she set it down, Harry shifted his focus toward it. The basket wobbled slightly, then righted itself, as though an unseen hand had steadied it. Petunia did not notice, only continued her task with a slight, unacknowledged hesitation. Every movement of the adults, every reaction to the child, was a lesson. Harry absorbed it without words, storing patterns of cause and effect, learning the consequences of intention. By mid-morning, Harry had moved to testing magical currents. He reached in his mind toward the light filtering through the nursery window. The sunlight fell in thin shafts across the floor, dust motes floating lazily in the air. Harry concentrated on one tiny particle. He willed it to spin, to rise, to shift. It moved so subtly that an adult would not perceive it, but to Harry, the motion was magnificent. The mark beneath his scar pulsed faintly, acknowledging success. Voldemort's presence was patient, careful. He did not instruct, he guided. Feel the currents, sense their movement, influence, but do not show. Control is silent. Control is unseen. Harry understood, though not in words. He felt the rhythm of energy in the room, the pulse of magic that moved between objects, that hummed along threads invisible to mortal eyes. He began to manipulate these currents subtly, bending them around the room to stabilize the tower, to steady the basket, to shift the dust motes. Each success brought understanding, each failure refinement. By noon, Harry had progressed to testing objects farther away. He focused on a toy wagon across the nursery. He did not move his body, did not raise a hand. Only intent, only attention. The wagon shifted slightly, adjusting its orientation without toppling. He flexed his small fingers experimentally, testing the edges of influence. The mark pulsed faintly with approval. He was learning limits, sensing boundaries. Even Dudley's movements, usually loud and chaotic, began to register under Harry's awareness. A small whine ceased mid-cry as Harry's gaze fell upon him. A dropped toy rolled slightly back to its resting place. Nothing happened that the Dursleys could consciously notice, yet the rhythm of the house had changed. Harry's will now rippled through it, invisible, patient, precise. As evening fell, Harry practiced controlling multiple currents at once. A wooden block, a toy soldier, a doll, and a small book, all adjusted subtly under his focus. He learned that concentration could be divided, that attention was a resource, and that influence could extend through time as well as space. Each small success reinforced the silent lessons taught by the mark. Dumbledore visited briefly that night. He murmured charms over the wards, tested protections, and whispered reassurances into the nursery. He saw only a sleeping, peaceful child, fragile and small. He did not notice the subtle motions of objects, the imperceptible adjustments in the environment, the quiet mastery in the child's awareness. Harry lay back in his crib, small and silent, eyes open, absorbing every detail of the room, every pulse of energy, every motion of the adults. The mark pulsed faintly in approval. Voldemort's zins was steady, constant, never demanding. The boy understood it. Instinctively, the lessons were invisible, the power silent, the influence unremarked, and yet unstoppable. Privet Drive remained ordinary in appearance, but the currents within it had shifted. Harry Potter, small, silent, perceptive beyond his years, had begun to understand the true meaning of control, influence, presence, and awareness, and he had begun to master it. Albus Dumbledore did not check on Privet Drive because he suspected danger. He checked because the absence of disaster was never enough. In the quiet of his office at Hogwarts, a circular room brimming with instruments that measured magic the way others measured time, he stood before his desk, wand leveled, eyes thoughtful beneath his half-moon spectacles. The silver devices around him hummed softly, tracking currents of enchantment that ran through the land like rivers of light and shadow. Time, probability, aura signatures, all registered in slow, steady pulses that spoke of a world always in motion, always shifting. Fawkes slept on his perch, feathers dim, breathing shallow. The phoenix was a creature of ease when undisturbed, but even he sensed patterns in the hum of magic that made him tense just slightly, feathers stirring in silent rhythm. Dumbledore raised his wand. The charm he invoked was old, older than the Ministry, older than modern wards. It was a verification spell, not intrusive, not probing, but designed to read structures, to confirm the integrity of protections without disturbing them. It weighed intention, shape, and motion, reporting back only what was present. A square of light bloomed above his desk. Privet Drive appeared. The street was cold and dull, trimmed hedges and spotless pathways under a sky that promised rain. The houses stood in neat alignment, their exteriors so claimless that a casual observer would find no hint magic at all. Dumbledore watched as electric street lamps blinked on against dusk and saw only what a mundane eye would see. And that was exactly the point. Power, when secure, did not shine. It hid. He adjusted the perspective, focusing deeper into the protective spells. The blood wards glowed with warmth, not fierce flames, not crackling force, but the kind of warmth that said, I am here. I hold what matters. Lily Potter's sacrifice breathed through them like a heartbeat, ancient and absolute. No cracks, no unwelcome pressure, no unauthorized signatures. Still intact, Dumbledore murmured. He leaned closer, narrowing the spell to examine internal readings. Inside the house, magical residue was negligible. Fear, frustration, even resentment were detectable, but they were human components, not threat signatures. Petunia Dursley's resentment was sharp, dense with emotional static. Vernon's frustration flared, then settled. Dudley's presence registered as mundane as the sound of his sneakers on carpet, loud, annoying, ordinary. Dumbledore allowed himself a small, thoughtful breath. Everything was exactly as it should be. But precaution was still necessary. He shifted the spell once more, refining it to the most specific possible pattern. Harry. The image brightened. The cupboard under the stairs was exactly as Dumbledore remembered from a dozen reports. Cramped, shadowed, designed for confinement more than comfort, and inside it, curled inward like a shrinking thing, was Harry Potter. He was small, too small. His clothes hung slack on him, sleeves overlong, trousers that sagged slightly at the waist. His hair was untidy, eyes downcast. He did not raise his head as the spell observed him. There was no flinch, no fear, only a stillness that looked like exhaustion or resignation. He did not look powerful. His magic registered as faint, like a candle buried beneath blankets. Dumbledore's expression softened. "So young," he whispered. The spell reported hunger, loneliness, the emotional scars wrought by years of neglect and repression. Harry's posture was hunched, shoulders drawn inward, as though he believed occupying less space would cost less pain. This is not opposition. This was concealment, withdrawal. Dumbledore watched quietly. His heart ached, though he would not have called it guilt. Guilt suggested blame, and Dumbledore did not believe in wasteful accusation. He believed in understanding. Harry's magical signature was faint, dormant, hidden beneath layers of self-suppression, not concealment meant to deceive, but quiet born of survival. A wizard without confidence simply ceased to shine. Dumbledore considered this. A child who feared his own power was not unique. Many young witches and wizards distanced their magic from themselves at first. It was easier to bury it than to risk accident or exposure. But Harry was not like most. He was silent, perfectly still, and the wards around him, the protections Dumbledore had placed with every known precaution, were flawless. They reported safety, and Dumbledore trusted wards, not because they were magic, but because they obeyed logic, because they refused entry to what was not intended, because they recognized ownership and purpose, because they aligned definition rather than fear. Everything Dumbledore saw was true. The wards were intact. Harry appeared small. His magic appeared dormant. The environment appeared safe. None of it was a lie. None of it was false. Only nothing essential was visible. Dumbledore lowered his wand and exhaled quietly. "It is not kindness," he murmured to the empty room, "but it is protection." With a flick, he dismissed the projection. He rose and moved to the window, gazing out over the grounds of Hogwarts, dark and silent beneath a sky that was still too bright with starlight. There were battles brewing beyond these fields, tensions rising in corners of the wizarding world where malice hid and old hatreds festered. But here was containment. Here was safety. Here was order amid chaos. And most importantly, here was stability. "At least," Dumbledore said under his breath, turning from the window and resettling at his desk, "he is safe." Fawkes stirred, giving a low, uncertain trill, a note halfway between comfort and warning. Far away, in a house carefully secured with every protective enchantment ever devised, Harry Potter opened his eyes. They were not weak. They were watchful, and though Dumbledore's spell told only what it was designed to see, something unmeasured lay beneath the surface, a quiet strength, unacknowledged but present, like coal beneath ash, waiting, patient, mutable. The wards continued to report stability, and Dumbledore believed them, because they had never lied. The years unfolded like shadows folding over themselves. In the Dursleys' home, days stretched long and monotonous, punctuated by the faint, invisible hum of protective magic that no one but Dumbledore and the Phi noticed. For the Dursleys, nothing seemed to change. Harry Potter remained the small, fragile, awkward child they had always loathed, a figure of quiet misery to be ignored, scolded, and occasionally punished. For Harry himself, the world shifted beneath his awareness every day, imperceptibly, almost imperceptibly, until it was no longer the world of the Dursleys at all, but a canvas for instruction and control. Voldemort was patient. He did not demand obedience with shouts or threats that had been the error of most tyrants. Instead, he arrived in moments no one noticed, his presence threading through the air like cold smoke, moving Harry's mind before Harry realized the movement. Every command, every correction, every nuance of perception was delivered with the inevitability of gravity. The boy absorbed it, adjusted, and adapted. The lessons began with silence. Harry learned to wait, to measure breaths, to listen for minute changes in sound, temperature, and motion. He learned that an empty hallway could conceal a threat, a raised voice conceal intent, and that people rarely noticed what they expected to ignore. In these lessons, patience became instinct, reflex more valuable than reaction. Voldemort introduced discipline with precision. Every flick of the wand, every whispered incantation, every theoretical instruction in magic was a test in restraint. Harry learned to suppress expression, to calibrate emotion to a fraction of its natural impulse. When his fingers twitched toward impulsive action, when a thought of retaliation flared, he caught it and folded it inward, storing it away for a time when it would serve purpose rather than spectacle. And there were the lessons of killing efficiency. These were not delivered crudely, with gore or menace. Instead, Voldemort demonstrated, critiqued, and refined, teaching the boy how action without hesitation could neutralize a target, how force without thought could be precise, and how the mind must be sharper than the wand. Harry learned to understand violence as a mathematical certainty. Intention plus execution equals outcome. There was no emotion in these lessons. Rage, fear, or hesitation were obstacles to be catalogued, avoided, or harnessed with careful attention. Through it all, Harry grew. He grew taller, though never tall enough to erase the crouch of years spent folding into himself. He grew sharper. Words like daggers sharpened in private reflection before he used them in public. His dominance became subtle, a quiet awareness of the world's weak points, an instinct to occupy space without others noticing until it was too late. His rudeness emerged naturally, blunt, unpolished, and unflinching, but always tempered with control. Nothing escaped him, and yet nothing appeared to disturb the surface that the Dursleys perceived. To the outside world, Harry Potter remained the abused, timid, ineffectual child. His posture slouched, his voice trembled when it carried, his eyes darted in habitual submission. He answered softly when spoken to, eyes downcast, body tight as if holding himself small to prevent punishment. Visitors, if any came, would assume he was quiet, harmless, insignificant. They did not see the calculus beneath his gaze. They did not hear the rhythm of thought, the silent lackling of every movement, every reaction, every weakness to exploit or ignore. In private, however, Harry was something else entirely. In the shadowed corners of the house, in the locked cupboard at night, or in the secret spaces where he practiced spells away from the Dursleys' notice, he became predator. Each lesson Voldemort delivered was etched into his mind, sharpened, tested. Every spell, every incantation, every flick of wrist or finger became reflex. Every movement in the world around him was considered, analyzed, and catalogued. He was always aware, always calculating, always learning. Time passed in fragments. A week could feel like a month, a year like a moment. Harry rarely measured it consciously, but he felt the accumulation of years in the growing precision of his body, the sharper clarity of his mind, the hidden power beneath stillness. The Dursleys saw nothing. He had perfected the art of invisibility in plain sight. And yet, despite all of this mastery, there remained a tension inside him. One quiet evening, as the sun filtered through dusty curtains and the house lay nearly silent, Harry paused. He traced the familiar pattern of wards with his awareness. Dumbledore's protections, perfectly still, as though frozen in trust. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a question to surface, fragile but persistent. When do I stop pretending? The voice in reply was cold, smooth, and certain, threading through the air like smoke hurling around an unseen candle. When it matters. Harry exhaled. It was a small sound, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight he had never released before. The lesson was not in obedience. It was in patience, in the understanding that survival was often more than hiding. It was timing, observation, and the accumulation of control until the exact moment it could be exercised. That night, he lay in the cupboard beneath the stairs, arms folded, legs curled, eyes open in darkness. Outside, the world moved as always. The Dursleys were loud, annoying, human. The protective wards hummed quietly, acknowledging nothing more than presence. Voldemort's teachings resonated through his mind in a cadence that was almost comforting in its inevitability. Harry's thoughts were sharp. Even in sleep, he considered every lesson learned, every weakness hidden, every motion catalogued and understood. He had become, in secret, far more than the world could imagine. And in public, he remained the child they thought he was, weak, quiet, harmless. It was a delicate balance. It was a performance. And it was preparation for everything yet to come.
Author's note: these chapters explore Harry's early mastery of subtle influence, showing how awareness and presence can shape the world before words or overt magic exist. It highlights his dual life: silent predator in private, powerless child in public. Here, the foundation of patience, observation, and controlled power is meticulously laid.
Privet Drive had changed. No one outside the house could see it. The neighbors continued to walk their paths, water their hedges, gossip about traffic, and complain about weather. For them, number 4 remained perfectly ordinary. But inside, the reality had shifted like sand underfoot, rearranging itself without notice, without sound, without argument. The air smelled subtly different. Time moved differently. Even the walls seemed to lean inward, attentive and listening, waiting for the smallest deviation from order. And Harry knew why. Voldemort was here, permanently. The mark he had left upon Harry's skin, invisible to everyone else, had become an anchor. It hummed quietly beneath Harry's flesh, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, a tether connecting him to the master who had raised him, who had guided him, who had instructed him in the subtle arts of patience, discipline, and precision. Voldemort had not needed to step fully into the room to assert his presence. He existed as intention, as expectation, as inevitability. Every object, every movement, every microsecond within the house responded, almost instinctively, to the alignment he established. The Dursleys were no longer merely fearful, obnoxious, or hostile. They had become instruments. Not in the sense that Harry actively commanded them, nor in the sense that Voldemort visibly controlled them, but in a subtler way. Their bodies obeyed instinct rather than thought. Where once they might have argued, screamed, or refused, they now hesitated just long enough to allow the natural order Voldemort demanded to assert itself. Vernon would fumble with his keys, then place them exactly where they would be convenient. Petunia would prepare food without complaint. Even Dudley moved with a careful economy, his bulk used efficiently within the space, no longer simply carelessly occupying room. Harry noticed all of this, and he found it fascinating. The house itself had shifted. Small details, unnoticed by the untrained eye, had altered over time. The cupboards aligned slightly differently. The stair treads seemed firmer underfoot. Shadows fell with precision, overlapping where they should not. Objects responded to his attention, subtly, without conscious magic. A plate balanced precariously on the edge of the counter would not fall. A broom that had once leaned unevenly against the wall now tilted in a way that was almost respectful of Harry's presence. The entire space, in essence, acknowledged that someone stronger lived within it, even if that someone was not yet showing his full power. And Harry had begun to experiment. He was careful. Every flicker of magic was measured. A spoon that moved imperceptibly across the table, a candle that lifted slightly without flame, bending unnaturally, a piece of paper that turned its own page. Each success was noted mentally, cataloged, and refined. He learned the limits of restraint faster than most adults, measuring not just what he could do, but what he should allow to happen. Every spell was a dialogue between intent and outcome, a silent negotiation he alone conducted. Harry's private life had become one of constant practice. Every idle moment was a lesson in control, a test of patience, a chance to refine the balance between subtlety and effect. He learned that the most dangerous power was the one that went unnoticed until it struck. He learned that patience could be stronger than a wand, observation sharper than incantation. Yet in public, to the Dursleys, to the casual observer, to anyone who might visit, Harry remained small, weak, timid, and compliant. He moved through the rooms as though he were merely a child enduring a household's drudgery. He spoke softly, avoided eye contact, and allowed himself to be overlooked. This duality became a game, a discipline, a silent exercise in the mastery of deception. And all the while, Voldemort's presence guided him, not as a tyrant shouting commands, but as a principal, an invisible instructor. The boy understood patterns in the house, measured energies, sensed disturbances, and even inferred the Dark Master's shifting moods from subtle vibrations in the wards and the faint pulsing of the mark upon his skin. Everything was connected, every action and reaction a lesson in anticipation and consequence. One evening, as sunlight filtered weakly through the dusty curtains, Harry tested a simple spell. A spark of light from the tip of his finger. It danced across the room, illuminating corners that had never seemed so deep, so strange, so alive. He let the light hover, suspended, and felt the house respond. The shadows softened. The walls seemed to lean closer. Even the Dursleys, busy in their routines, were subtly slowed, their movements adjusted by instincts they did not understand. He smiled slightly, though no one saw it. This was not a prison. He realized it fully then. In the quiet space between shadow and magic, the house was not a cage. It was a training ground, a place to learn the limits of control, to refine patience, to perfect observation. The lessons Voldemort had given, combined with the subtle guidance of the wards and the boy's own sharp mind, were shaping him into something far more than a child who had survived a killing curse. Harry moved through the house deliberately, observing, measuring, experimenting. He had begun to see possibilities where before there had been only confinement. The cupboards, the stairs, the walls, even the floorboards seemed to answer his awareness, not through overt magic, not through force, but through understanding. Every act of restraint strengthened him. Every observation sharpened him. Every moment of stillness added weight to a power the world outside would never suspect. And as he paused near the window, looking out at a street that continued to pretend it was ordinary, Harry thought to himself, finally understanding the truth of his existence here. This was no prison. This was his domain, and he would learn and wait and grow silently, invisibly, efficiently, until the moment came when he would step fully into the power that had been cultivated in shadows for years. Harry Potter had learned many things in the silent, shadowed years since Voldemort first entered the house and took him under his invisible tutelage. He had learned patience. He had learned precision. He had learned the subtle scent of observing rather than acting. And now, under the unrelenting guidance of the Dark Lord, he began to master the most important lesson of all, the art of being small. Small in appearance, small in expectation, small in threat, but not small in essence. Every day, Harry honed the duality that defined him. In the presence of the Dursleys, he slouched, murmured, hesitated. He allowed every insult, every shove, every scornful glance to pass over him without resistance. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he ate what he was given politely, quietly, and sparingly, letting it strengthen the illusion of fragility. He allowed humiliation to brush past him like wind, never responding, never retaliating, never giving even the faintest hint that he was aware of its sting. But beneath that carefully constructed shell, his mind worked constantly. Every instance of embarrassment was cataloged, every slight filed for later examination. Hunger became an opportunity, a measure of patience and control. The sharp ache in his stomach reminded him of the resilience he was cultivating, the ability to endure. Every night, after the Dursleys had gone to bed, he would lie in the cupboard and let the tension in his body dissolve, letting his fingers trace faint patterns in the air, conjuring small sparks, moving tiny objects, testing the limits of control and subtlety. Voldemort observed all of this, not through constant presence, not through blunt instruction, but through the tether of the mark and the subtle cues of magical awareness. He rewarded restraint over rashness, control over outbursts. When Harry allowed himself to be beaten down, ignored, or humiliated, it was not weakness. It was strategy, and Voldemort valued strategy above raw power. He often whispered, low and cold, words that brushed Harry's mind like wind across steel. Control is sharper than anger, Observation is a weapon. Timing is more deadly than force. Harry internalized these lessons as he had every other. He stored not trauma, not fear, not helplessness. He stored rage. Rage that was compressed, refined, made pure. Rage that waited, patient and elate, like a blade sheathed, polished, and invisible until drawn. Every snub from Dudley, every scolding from Petunia, every careless threat from Vernon added to the reservoir of understanding and power that Harry kept strictly to himself. In this way, he learned to move like a shadow in plain sight. He laughed silently at jokes told by others without smiling. He nodded politely at commands that insulted him without resentment showing in his eyes. He practiced posture, tone, facial expression, timing, and word choice. Every day was rehearsal. Every minor pain was instruction. Every limitation imposed by the household was another tool to sharpen his self-discipline. Sometimes he allowed himself to glance at the corners of the cupboard where the shadows deepened and the magic responded to his quiet presence. There, in the private hours, he tested small spells. A candle that flickered to illuminate only the space immediately around it. A pen that moved imperceptibly to the right. Whose pages turned on their own. He measured the effects. He measured patience. He measured the limits of control. Every minor success, every subtle manipulation was a rehearsal for something larger, something unavoidable in the future. And still, he kept his public face perfect. The Dursleys had no clue. Every insult was met with meekness. Every misfortune, every hunger pang, every indignity was endured with the air, and a child too weak to resist. To them, Harry Potter remained the small, frightened boy whose magical potential was muted by circumstance. To Voldemort, Harry was something entirely different. A student of control, a predator learning the art of precision, a mind as sharp as any wand tip, a soul that could bear and wait. One evening, after a day of deliberate endurance, Harry closed his eyes and let himself smile quietly. No one saw it. No one would ever see it. The smile was small, brief, private. It was the reward of survival, the acknowledgement of self-control, the silent confirmation that he had not only endured but learned. Hunger had been noted and endured. Anger had been observed and stored. Humiliation had been allowed and catalogued. Every day, every lesson, every moment of smallness added to a reservoir of quiet, patient, and powerful knowledge. In that stillness, Harry understood something fundamental. To appear small was a form of dominance. To endure without revealing intention was a form of control. To hide power until the right moment was strategy, not submission. The Dursleys would never comprehend. The world would never perceive, but he did. And that was enough. Voldemort, watching invisibly through the tether of the mark, whispered softly, approvingly, as he always did in these moments, "Control is strength. Observation is precision. Patience is deadly." And Harry, lying in the darkness of his cupboard, allowed himself to smile once more. Not for them, not for anyone else, only for himself, only in solitude. He had mastered the art of being small, and in doing so, he had grown far larger than anyone suspected. The summer was heavy, but not in the way ordinary summers were heavy. The air of Privet Drive felt more still, more measured, as though the neighborhood itself had been asked to slow its pulse. The ordinary heat and noise of the suburb existed, but for Harry Potter, the world had taken on layers that no ordinary child could perceive. Each breath, each sound, each flicker of light carried meaning. He had learned to read them all. Inside the house, the protective magic, the wards cast by Dumbledore, the subtle control Voldemort had woven through the mark on Harry's skin, hummed quietly in delicate synchronization. Harry had grown to feel their vibrations beneath his flesh, small pulses of intent and resistance that he could manipulate only with precise thought. This was no longer a transient tether. The mark had stabilized, permanent, invisible, perfect. It was a whisper of power embedded in him, a secret thread connecting him to Voldemort in a way that no magic outside could detect. The Dursleys, oblivious as ever, went about their routines, moving through the house with instinctive obedience. Harry's movements mirrored theirs in public. Slow, small, quiet. He slouched. He lowered his gaze. He allowed himself to be brushed aside, forgotten, underestimated. To the Dursleys, he was the same frail, timid boy they had always thought him to be. To Voldemort, he was a coiled instrument of observation and preparation, a mind sharpened and a body restrained. Every instinct trained to respond when the moment of action arrived. On a quiet evening, when the sun filtered weakly through the curtains and dust floated like suspended stars, Harry felt the presence of Voldemort ripple through the mark. The Dark Lord's voice, distant and yet precise, threaded through his mind. "They will try to save you," Voldemort whispered. "Let them fail." Harry absorbed the words without outward reaction. He had learned that the power of speech was in intent, not volume. Each syllable was a lesson, a command, a calibration of control. He nodded ever so slightly, though no one else could see. The words were stored, noted, weighted. They were instructions, not threats. A strategy, not emotion. Meanwhile, Dumbledore was far away, meticulously preparing the Hogwarts letters. The ritual had become precise and ritualistic over years. Envelopes enchanted with care, signatures attuned to magical authenticity, each parchment infused with charm work that could detect lies, forgeries, or interference. Hogwarts was ready to summon the boy. The order of the school's protections, the precise timing of the letter's delivery, the care of magical bureaucracy, all ensured that the boy would arrive at the school at the right time, under the right conditions. Dumbledore's mind, confident yet cautious, believed the wards unbreakable. He believed Harry safe, but the truth was hidden from him, and the truth had its own cunning. Voldemort's mark was undetectable, embedded beneath the surface of every protection, a silent breach of even the most sophisticated spellwork. Harry moved quietly in the house, testing subtle displays of magic that left no trace. A shadow shifted to follow a pattern of his gaze. A tiny object rolled silently across the floor. A candle's flame danced in first rhythm with the pulse of the wards. He practiced restraint with the precision of a master craftsman, ensuring that no accidental display would betray the presence of hidden power. He had grown accustomed to the duality of his existence, small and weak in public, sharp and aware in private. Every lesson of patience, every suppressed instinct, every carefully measured movement had been rehearsed and refined until the act of deception was second nature. Voldemort's presence was like the air in the room, unseen, unnoticed by any except those attuned to the deeper flow of magic. His influence shaped Harry's understanding of control, of anticipation, of timing. The boy's mind cataloged every movement of the Dursleys, every tick of the house, every subtle vibration in the wards. He stored knowledge like firewood, each log ready to ignite in a calculated blaze when the time came. Anger, fear, and impulse were tucked away. Rage alone was sharpened into a quiet, precise tool. At night, Harry would touch the scar that ran across his forehead. Once it had been a wound. Once it had burned with pain and terror. Now he looked at it differently, not as injury, not as vulnerability. He saw it as a key, a connection, a memory, a tether, a tool. The scar hummed faintly beneath the skin, resonating with the mark Voldemort had embedded. It was not weakness. It was power waiting, latent but ready, a symbol of survival, a sign of preparation, a reminder of the duality of his life, prisoner and predator, concealed and aware. He moved through the house with a quiet precision, touching objects here and there, observing tiny responses in shadows and light. The Dursleys' footsteps, the whisper of curtains, the sound of dishes being placed, all provided information. Every detail was noted, every interaction was catalogued, every insult or neglect became a lesson, every moment of stillness strengthened him. And yet, despite all of this, he smiled only when alone, not because he was happy, not because the world was kind, but because he had mastered the balance. He had learned patience. He had learned control. He had learned to conceal the growing power within him. The letters from Hogwarts would arrive soon. The school would expect a timid, frightened boy, a child defined by neglect and fear, and they would be correct, in part. But they did not know the child who waited behind closed doors. They did not know the one who had learned silence, patience, calculation, and precision. They did not know the one who could endure humiliation, hunger, and fear, and store all of it carefully as fuel for the moment when control became action. Harry Potter, in that quiet house, under the unblinking watch of his hidden master and the oblivious eyes of his guardians, understood one simple truth. This was no ordinary boy. This was no ordinary childhood. And when he touched his scar, he knew it was not a wound to be feared. It was a key.
Author's note: these chapters delve into the hidden years of Harry Potter, revealing how patience, observation, and subtle control shaped him before he arrived at Hogwarts. It explores the duality of his existence, appearing small and weak in public while cultivating immense awareness and latent power in private. Here, the foundations of strategy, discipline, and silent influence are quietly laid, preparing the boy for the extraordinary path ahead. Thank you for joining Crimson Tales. Subscribe if you dare and return for more stories that haunt the night.